Part 1, Small Boy, Small Steps. Hello, my friend. Before this story begins, let me talk to you, not as a storyteller to a listener, not as a teacher to a student, but as one human being to another. Let me speak to you in the quiet space between our shared experiences. You see, I believe we are more alike than we are different. We breathe the same air. We feel the same gravitational pull holding us to this earth. Our hearts beat with the same rhythm of hope and fear, of dreaming and doubting. Let me tell you what I know about you, though we have never met. I know you wake up. Some mornings you wake with the sun feeling its gentle insistence through your window. Other mornings you wake in darkness, the world still sleeping, and you lie there listening to the silence of your own breathing. I know there are days when opening your eyes feels like a monumental effort, when the weight of simply beginning presses down on your chest. The space between the dream world and the waking world feels vast, and you hover there for a moment, reluctant to cross over into the demands of the day. You feel tired, not just the physical tiredness that comes from too little sleep, though you know that kind too. I mean the deeper tiredness, the weariness that settles in your bones after trying, after caring, after showing up again when you would rather not. Your eyes sometimes feel heavy, not from lack of rest, but from all they have seen and all they are trying not to see. Your mind grows weary from its constant circling, from solving problems that have no clear solutions, from wondering if you are enough. It is the fatigue of expectation, both the expectations placed upon you and, more crucially, the expectations you have learned to place upon yourself. This tiredness is a quiet companion, one you have learned to carry with you, to make space for at your table. You feel scared sometimes. Let us name this truth gently, for it is nothing to be ashamed of. Fear visits everyone. It comes as a cold whisper in the middle of the night when the house is quiet. It arrives as a sudden tightness in your throat when faced with something new or challenging. It appears as hesitation when opportunity knocks, because what if you open the door and cannot handle what stands there? This fear does not make you weak, my friend. It makes you human. It is the ancient, biological signal that you are about to step outside the circle of what is known, and every living thing feels a tremor when it approaches that edge. Your fear is not a flaw, it is a sign you are paying attention. It means you care about outcomes. It means you understand that things matter. The only life without fear is a life not being lived, and you want a better life. Not necessarily a richer life in the material sense, though stability is a beautiful thing to desire. No, I believe you want a quieter life inside your own mind, a life where your thoughts are not a storm of criticism and worry, but can sometimes be a gentle stream. You want a life where you can look in the mirror and recognize the person looking back and even like them a little, not for their achievements, but for their continued trying. You want to feel purposeful, to feel that your presence here creates a small, positive ripple in the pond of existence. You want your days to add up to something that matters, even if that something is small and visible only to you. The integrity of a promise kept to yourself, the patience shown to a stranger, the courage of one honest conversation. You want to grow. You want to become. You want the person you are tomorrow to be slightly wiser, slightly kinder, slightly stronger than the person you are today. This wanting is the seed of everything beautiful. It is the beginning of every journey. This story is about a normal boy. He is not chosen by destiny. He is not marked by extraordinary talent or cursed with dramatic tragedy. He does not have a secret inheritance waiting, or a magical guide who will appear to show him the way. He is ordinary in the most beautiful sense, which means he contains within him all the dormant potential that every ordinary person carries. He is a vessel waiting to be filled with experience, with effort, with small, deliberate actions. His story is not about a lightning strike of transformation, but about the slow, steady warmth of a candle that finally learns to hold its flame against the draft. You might see yourself in him. You might see the boy you once were, or the person you sometimes feel you still are inside when the world's labels fall away and you're just you, wondering what to do next. His name was Aman, a simple name meaning peace, a name that held a quiet hope from parents who wanted for their son what all parents want: a life less troubled than their own, a little more light, a little less struggle. It was a name whispered with love, called out in the dusty lane for dinner, written carefully at the top of school papers. It was his identity, and yet, for a long time, it felt like a coat that didn't quite fit, a name belonging to someone more confident, more capable than the boy he felt himself to be. Ammon lived in a small house, not just architecturally small, but small in the way that every sound was shared, every emotion felt collective. The walls were thin membranes between lives, permeable to joy and grief alike. He could hear his father's soft, rhythmic snores from the next room, a sound that eventually became the drumbeat of night's security. He could hear the precise, methodical chopping of vegetables from the kitchen where his mother prepared the evening meal, each thought a note in the symphony of care. He knew the distant, insistent barking of the neighbor's dog that always began at sunset, as regular as a clock. The roof was low enough that during the fierce monsoon rains, the sound of 1,000 raindrops on corrugated tin became a deafening, all-encompassing symphony that vibrated in his teeth and filled every corner of consciousness. There was no escaping it, just as there was no escaping the intimate awareness of each other's moods, triumphs, and disappointments. A sigh in the living room was felt in the bedroom. A suppressed laugh was a shared secret. This smallness, this closeness, bred a profound intimacy with life's textures. He knew the cool, smooth feel of the painted cement floor beneath his bare feet on a summer morning. He knew the exact, map-like pattern of hairline cracks on the ceiling above his bed, a constellation he would trace with his eyes every night as he floated toward sleep. He knew the particular scent of old paper and dust that rose from his schoolbooks, the oily smell of the kerosene lamp that fought back the darkness, the fragrant steam from his mother's cooking pot that promised nourishment. His world had defined edges, knowable boundaries, and within those boundaries one thing loomed larger and more impenetrable than any other, the English language. To Ammon, English was not just a subject in school. It was a wall, a high, smooth wall separating him from a world that seemed brighter, smarter, more successful. In his simple school, with its worn benches and chalk dust air, English was the gatekeeper. The letters on the page danced and mocked him. They looked strange, angular, and illogical compared to the flowing, familiar script of his mother tongue. The sounds felt foreign and clumsy in his mouth, his tongue tripping over syllables that seemed to have too many teeth. Saying vegetable was a marathon. Neighborhood felt like a mouthful of pebbles. It was a door that seemed permanently locked to him. He would watch other boys, Ravi, with his confident voice, or Sunil, who could read aloud without stumbling, and feel a hollow opening up inside his chest. They possessed a key he could not find. The teacher's voice, asking him to read a paragraph, would trigger a cold flush of panic. The words would blur. The silence of the waiting classroom would grow louder and louder until it was a roar in his ears. His own voice, when it finally came, sounded small and strange to him, a timid creature emerging from a cave. He was afraid of mistakes. This fear was a physical thing. It was the hot rush of blood to his cheeks when laughter followed a mispronounced word. It was the sinking, heavy feeling in his stomach when he saw a red X next to his answer, a public declaration of his failure to understand. It was the dread that coiled in his gut on the morning of an English test, turning his breakfast to stone. The fear was not of the mistake itself, but of what it represented: exposure. Proof that he was on the wrong side of the wall. Proof that he was not good enough. He began to build a fortress of silence around himself in English class, hoping to become invisible, hoping the locked door would not be noticed if he never approached it. But inside that quiet boy, in the deepest part of him where hope is a stubborn weed, a tiny revolution was brewing. It did not arrive with a shout or a dramatic epiphany. It came on an utterly ordinary afternoon. He was walking home, the dust warm under his feet, the weight of another silent English class on his shoulders. He looked down and saw a line of ants crossing the path. Each one was infinitesimally small, carrying a crumb many times its size. They were not moving fast. They stumbled. They adjusted their grip. But they did not stop. They followed a trail, one tiny, determined step after another. And in that moment a simple, quiet thought settled in Ammon's heart. What if I just try, not to climb the whole wall today, not to speak perfectly, but just to take one small step, just one. That was the decision, not a grand resolution announced to the world, but a private pact made in the dusty sunlight. He decided to take small steps. That evening, instead of closing his English book with relief, he opened it to the first page, not to chapter 5 where the class was struggling, but to the very beginning, to the alphabet. He pointed to each letter. Aid. His voice was a whisper. Bade. He did not think about grammar, about tenses, about poetry. He thought only about the shape of the letter and the sound it made. He studied a little every day. Just 10 minutes. Sometimes it was just 5 new words. Window, bed, chin, light, water. He wrote them. He said them. He pointed to the objects in his small room. He made them real. He practiced English slowly, with the patience of the ants. He stood before the small, cloudy mirror in the wash area. He looked into his own uncertain eyes and whispered, "My name is Aman." The sentence felt stiff, theatrical. He tried again. "My name is Aman." He broke it down. He built it up. He named the sky as he walked. Blue sky, gray cloud. It felt silly at first. Then it felt secret. Then, gradually, it began to feel like a discovery. In this slowness, he learned discipline, not the harsh discipline of punishment, but the gentle, firm discipline of returning, the discipline of showing up for those 10 minutes even when his mind begged to go play, even when he felt stupid, even when progress was invisible. He learned that discipline is not a whip, it is a promise you make to your future self, and you keep it one today at a time. It is the container that holds effort until it can become habit. And from this daily returning, this trying and failing and trying again, he learned the most valuable lesson of all. He learned that confidence does not arrive first. It does not come as a gift before the battle. You do not wake up confident and then go and do hard things. Confidence comes from trying. It is the residue left on your hands after you have worked. It is the quiet voice that grows a little stronger each time you face the thing that scares you and survive it. It is the incremental proof, gathered in the small notebook of your heart, that you are capable of enduring, of learning, of moving forward even an inch. With every whispered word in front of the mirror, every correctly spelled word on a page, Aman was not just learning English. He was depositing tiny coins of courage into a bank account he didn't know he had. The balance was growing. The boy who was afraid of the locked door was slowly, quietly, fitting a key. Part 2. The power of hard work. The quiet decision had been made. The first small steps had been taken. But as Aman would learn, and as you, my friend, have likely also discovered, the distance between a decision and a result is a landscape all its own. It is a country called practice. Its climate is not dramatic storms, but 1,000 small rains. Its geography is not soaring mountains, but countless, gentle hills. The journey across it requires a guide who speaks plainly. Hard work. Aman started working harder. Let us be very clear about what this means. When we talk of working harder, we don't speak of grand gestures. We don't mean he spent 10 hours in a single day in a blaze of exhausting glory, only to collapse and not return for a week. That is not harder work, that is a burst, a sprint. Life is not a sprint. Life is a very long walk. Working harder, for Aman, meant consistency with slightly more weight. It meant extending the daily 10 minutes to 15. It meant looking at 5 new words and then adding 2 more for review. It was not perfect. His sentences, when he dared to write them, were like crooked paths through a forest. I go to market yesterday. The grammar stumbled, fell, picked itself up with a limp. His pronunciation was a hesitant sketch of the real sound. The V in vegetable still sometimes vanished. The th in think felt like a strange, new gymnastics for his tongue. He listened to the radio sometimes, to the smooth, flowing English of the newsreader, and his own voice in comparison felt like a cart with a squeaky, wobbly wheel. The gap between what he heard and what he could produce was an ocean, and it was not fast. This is where patience must make its home. True growth happens beneath the surface, in the dark soil where roots are spreading unseen. For weeks, for months, Aman felt no different. He still hesitated before speaking in class. He still felt the hot panic when called upon. The progress was as invisible as the minute hand on a clock. You cannot see it move, but you can look away for an hour and find it has traveled. His father, watching him murmur to himself, would sometimes ask, "Is it helping, Beta?" And Ammon, honest to his core, could only shrug. I don't know, Papa, but I am still doing it. But daily, this was the simple, profound engine of it all. The daily return, rain or shine, good mood or bad, feeling hopeful or feeling defeated. This was the non-negotiable ritual. It was the laying of a single brick, day after day. Some days the brick was laid with focus and care, other days it was placed with a sigh, almost resentfully. But it was placed. The wall was being built, not by a dramatic construction crew, but by one boy, one brick at a time, in the quiet minutes after dinner or before the sun rose. Then came the failures. They were inevitable, these small earthquakes. He failed tests. The paper would come back a sea of red ink, not just marks wrong, but the red ink seemed to shout, to underline his inadequacy. It felt personal. Those marks were not just on the paper, they felt branded on his skin. He carried the folded test in his bag like a heavy stone. He imagined his teacher's disappointed glance, the subtle shift in his classmates' perception. The shame was a bitter taste in his mouth, a cold hollow in his stomach. He felt sad. This sadness was important. It was not a sign to quit, it was the honest grief of effort unmet. He would sit on the low wall at the edge of the schoolyard, watching the other boys play a loud game of cricket, their shouts of joy a stark contrast to the quiet failure humming in his ears. He wondered, in those moments, if he was a fool, if he was trying to draw water from a well that was dry for him. The temptation to close the book forever, to accept his place on the wrong side of the English wall, was a soft, persuasive whisper. Just stop, it's easier. But he did not quit. This, my friend, is the most critical turn in the path. The decision to continue after the failure. The decision to feel the sadness, to acknowledge the red ink, and then to open the book again. This is where character is forged, not in the success, but in the moment right after the fall, when every part of you aches to stay down, and you choose, somehow, to put your hand back on the rough stone and pull yourself up. He practiced again. He opened the book to the very test he had failed. He did not hide it. He faced it. He looked at each red mark not as a judgment, but as a teacher. Here, the red ink said, you did not understand the past tense. Let us look at it again. He sounded out the words he had mispronounced. He wrote the correct sentences 10 times, 20 times, until his hand cramped. This was not punishment. This was dialogue. This was listening to what the failure was trying to tell him. He began to speak English alone. Not just naming objects, but holding conversations. Walking the dusty path to the market, he would describe his day to an imaginary friend. Today, the sun is very hot. My teacher, Mr. Das, wore a blue shirt. I am going to buy potatoes. It felt ridiculous. He would glance around to make sure no one was near enough to hear the mad boy talking to himself. But in that space of imagined conversation, something loosened. The language began to seep out of the textbook and into his life. It became a tool for noticing, for describing his own existence. It started to belong to him. And then, almost without announcement, slowly, he improved. The first sign was not a test score. It was a moment of unthinking comprehension. He was at the tea stall, waiting for his father. A news bulletin was on the radio, a report about the monsoon rains arriving in the south. He was half listening, thinking of other things, when he realized he had understood it. The entire bulletin. The meaning had come to him directly, without the laborious process of translation in his head. It was as if a door in a thick wall had simply swung open, and light had poured through. He stood still, the sounds of the street fading around him. He had understood. Another day, he raised his hand in class to answer a simple question about a story. His voice did not shake. The sentence came out in the correct order. Mr. Das, a man of few words, gave a single, slow nod. Not a smile, just a nod. But in that nod, Ammon saw a universe of recognition. It said, I see your effort. I see the change. Hard work did not lie. This is the great, unwavering truth Ammon discovered. Hard work is the most honest companion you can have. It does not flatter you with early, easy rewards. It does not promise shortcuts. It is stubborn and plain speaking. It says, you give me your time, your focus, your repeated effort, and I will give you capability. Not genius, not perfection, but the solid, usable strength of capability. It pays its debts faithfully, but always on its own schedule. It showed progress. It showed it in the nod of a teacher. It showed it in the way a sentence now formed naturally in his mind before he spoke it. It showed it in the fading of the panic flush when he was called upon. It showed it in a quiet, new feeling that began to live in his chest, not arrogance, not boastfulness, but a simple, sturdy satisfaction. It was the satisfaction of a craftsman who sees a rough block of wood slowly taking the shape he intended, under the steady, repeated touch of his own hands. Each small success, each moment of understanding, was another brick mortared firmly into place. The wall he was building was not a wall to keep things out. It was a wall of confidence, of self-trust, and he was building it himself, from the ground up, with the honest, undramatic, daily bricks of hard work. Part 3. Time, pressure, and self-belief. Life, as it tends to do, grew more complex. The small, contained world of Amon's childhood began to stretch at the seams. The simple rhythm of school, home, and quiet study was disrupted by a new force, the multiplying demands of growing up. It was no longer just about English. It was about everything, all at once. Life became busy. Schoolwork evolved from learning letters to grappling with algebra's mysterious X, with the winding rivers of geography, with the dense dates of history. Homework piled up like leaves in autumn. Chores at home increased as he grew older and stronger, fetching more water, helping with repairs, running errands that took him across town. His mind, which once had the spaciousness to focus on one thing, now felt like a small room into which too much furniture was being crammed. The hours were no longer empty vessels waiting to be filled with a single pursuit. They were contested territory. Time felt less. Have you felt this, my friend? The strange acceleration of days when responsibility arrives. The morning would begin, and in what felt like a single blink, the sun was setting, and the list of things he'd intended to do remained mostly untouched. The precious, quiet 15 minutes for English practice were the first to be squeezed, pushed to the edges of exhaustion, right before sleep. Time was no longer a friend with open hands, it was a thief in the shadows, stealing moments before he could even name them. Pressure increased. This pressure was a silent, atmospheric change. It was the weight of expectation. His parents, though never saying it directly, had a hopeful look in their eyes when report cards came. His teachers spoke of important years and future prospects. His own internal voice, now more aware, began its own commentary. You must do better. You must catch up. Everyone is moving faster. What will become of you? The fear of failure, which had once been specific to a classroom subject, now generalized into a fog of anxiety about his entire future. The pressure was not a shout, it was a constant, low hum in the background of his thoughts, a vibration of unease. In this new, crowded landscape, Ammon faced a choice. He could let the pressure scatter him. He could let the lack of time become an excuse. He could revert to feeling helpless, a leaf in a swift stream. Or he could apply the one principle he had learned that truly worked, the principle of small steps. He realized he needed a new kind of small step. He needed a map for the chaos. He learned to plan his day, not with the rigid, overwhelming schedules of a general commanding an army. His planning was humbler, more realistic. It was the planning of a gardener tending a small, precious plot. He made small plans. He would look at the jumble of tasks and pick just 3 for the next day. Not 10. 3. 1. Finish math problems before school. 10. Practice English pronunciation for 10 minutes after lunch. 3. Help mother with the shopping. The plans were modest, achievable. They were designed not to impress, but to be done. He wrote them on a small scrap of paper, not as a demand, but as a promise to himself. They were real plans. This was crucial. He accounted for reality. He knew he was tired after school, so he didn't plan intense study for that time. He knew the mornings were quieter, so that's where he placed the hardest task. A real plan respects your energy, your context, your humanity. It is not a wish list, it is a contract written with an understanding of your own limits. In this daily act of planning and doing, a subtle, powerful shift began to occur within him. He began to believe in effort, not in guaranteed outcomes, not in a fantasy of effortless genius, but in the tangible, gritty reality of effort itself. He started to separate the feeling of fear from the act of trying. The fear would say, "You might fail the test." The belief in effort would reply, "I will study for the test." The fear would whisper, "You don't have enough time." The belief in effort would answer, "I will use the 20 minutes I do have." He stopped asking the paralyzing question, "Can I do it all?" and started asking the actionable question, "What can I do right now?" He stopped believing in fear. He saw fear for what it was, a feeling, not a fact. A visitor, not the landlord of his mind. He learned to acknowledge its presence, the tight chest, the quickening pulse, and then to gently move his attention to the small, concrete action in front of him. The action was the antidote. You cannot drown in fear while you are actively swimming, even with small strokes. And from this daily, repeated choice to act despite the fear, to plan despite the chaos, to trust the effort more than the doubt, self-belief grew. It did not fall from the sky as a blessing. It did not come from a motivational speech. Self-belief grew from action. It was the quiet, accumulating proof he provided to himself every single day. Each time he completed one of his small plans, he was giving himself evidence. "I'm a person who keeps promises to myself." Each time he chose practice over panic, he was building a neural pathway of competence. The belief was not a cause, it was a consequence. It was the flower that finally bloomed from the long-nurtured plant of disciplined action. It was slow action. There were no explosions of transformation. Some days, the self-belief felt fragile, a tiny flame guttering in the wind of a bad mood or a setback. But it was daily action, and the daily action was the oxygen. It fed the flame. Over weeks and months, the tiny flame grew steadier, warmer. He began to trust not that he would always succeed, but that he would always try. He began to believe not that he was the smartest, but that he was persistent. This self-belief was not loud or boastful. It was a quiet, solid warmth in his center. It was the knowledge, earned through 1,000 small returns to the task, that he could face a challenge, break it down, and work on it. Time no longer felt like a thief when he was consciously choosing how to spend its currency. Pressure no longer felt like a crushing weight when he was actively bearing it. One small, planned step at a time, he was learning to build within the storm of growing up, a small, steady shelter made of his own reliable effort. Part 4. Work, Honesty, and Real Life. The structured world of school, with its bells and terms and predictable challenges, came to an end. The final exam was taken, the last books closed. For Aman, the gate of childhood swung shut with the quiet, final click. He stood on the threshold of a new, vast and uncharted country, the world of work. The walls of the classroom were gone. Now, the only test was survival, and the only curriculum was written in the hard script of necessity. School ended. The familiar architecture of his days, the walk to the same building, the same faces, the clear tasks of learning collapsed overnight. In its place was a yawning space of uncertainty. The structure that had, in its way, contained and directed his efforts was gone. He felt unmoored, a boat cut loose from its dock, floating on a wide, indifferent sea. The question was no longer what is the answer, but what is my place? Ammon looked for work. This search was his first real job. He polished his one pair of good shoes until they shone like dark pools. He ironed his best shirt, a crisp white one, with meticulous care, smoothing out every wrinkle as if he could iron out his own nervousness. He practiced answers to questions he imagined he would be asked. "What are your strengths?" "I am a hard worker." "I am reliable." He recited them to the mirror, but the face looking back still held the softness of a student, not the hardness of a working man. He walked to the small businesses in his part of the city, the printer's shop smelling of ink, the modest hardware store with its rows of nails and coils of wire, the bustling grain merchants. He presented himself, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He faced rejection. It is one thing to fail a test on paper. It is another thing to have your whole self, your hope and your need assessed and found wanting in a single glance. The word no took many forms. Sometimes it was direct, a curt shake of the head before he'd even finished speaking. Sometimes it was polite, wrapped in empty promise. We will call you if something comes up. The silence that followed this sentence was the loudest sound he knew. It was a void filled with the echo of his own inadequacy. He would walk away, the shine on his shoes dulled by dust, the starch in his shirt wilting in the heat. Each rejection was a small death of hope. The fear, his old companion, whispered loudly now, you are not needed. You have nothing to offer. But then, a break, a small crack in the wall. He found a small job in a small, dimly lit shop that sold household goods, buckets, brooms, soap, and simple toys. The owner, Mr. Kapoor, was a man with tired eyes and a permanent streak of grease on his forearm. He needed someone to sweep, to stack, to arrange, to run to the wholesaler. The pay was meager. The work was physical, monotonous. But it was work. When Mr. Kapoor said, start tomorrow, Aman felt a surge of gratitude so profound it was almost dizzying. He had a place to be, a purpose, however humble. He worked honestly. This is where Aman's true education began, the one no school could provide. He did not see the menial tasks as beneath him. He swept the floor not just in the open spaces, but behind the sacks of rice, in the corners where spiders spun webs. He arranged the buckets not just to be neat, but by size and color, creating a small order from the chaos. When he unpacked new stock, he checked it carefully, noting cracks or damage. He did not cut corners, because he had come to understand that a corner cut is a weakness in your own foundation. He arrived 10 minutes early, not to be seen, but to be ready. He worked with a quiet, thorough focus. This honesty in labor was not for Mr. Kapoor, it was a pact with the work itself. It was the principle of small steps applied now to brooms and boxes. Then came the test. A busy Friday, the shop crowded. Mr. Kapoor, flustered, was handling the cash box. Aman was fetching items, wrapping purchases. At the end of the day, as Aman was preparing to close up, he opened the cash drawer to straighten the notes. There, tucked under a pile of smaller bills, was a 500 rupee note. Too much. A day's earnings for the shop, a small fortune to Aman. A mistake, a simple human error in the rush. His first thought was not a thought, but a feeling, a hot, swift pang of temptation. He could slip it into his pocket. No one would know. It would mean new shoes for his father, a good sari for his mother, relief. He held the note. The world narrowed to that piece of paper. He thought of Mr. Kapoor's tired eyes, of the trust implicit in letting him handle the shop. He thought of the person he was trying to become, brick by brick. The honest work of sweeping corners would mean nothing if he stole from the cash box. The small steps were about building a self he could respect, not just a life he could afford. He returned the extra money. His hand was steady, but his heart thundered as he walked to the back room where Mr. Kapoor was sipping tea. Sir, he said, his voice calm. This was in the drawer. I think it is too much. He held out the note. Mr. Kapoor looked at it, then at Aman's face. For a long moment he said nothing. The silence was thick. Then he took the note, not looking at it, his eyes still on Aman. He gave a slow, deep nod. Not a thank you, something heavier, a recognition. Trust was built. It was not built with words, but with that single action. After that day, Mr. Kapoor's demeanor changed. He began to ask Aman's opinion on small things. Should we order more of this soap? Can you handle closing alone tomorrow? The questions were a gift. They said, I see you. I trust you. Aman was given more responsibility, not just more work. He was taught how to keep the simple accounts, how to negotiate with a surly delivery boy. The shop, in a small way, became his too. Honesty made him strong. He discovered that doing the right thing, especially when it costs you, forges an inner steel. It straightens your spine. That night, after returning the money, he slept a deep, untroubled sleep. He had faced a mirror and not flinched. The strength he gained was not muscular, it was moral. It was the unshakable knowledge that he was the kind of man who would return the money. This knowledge became a quiet source of power, more valuable than any coin. And life, in its rough, unvarnished way, taught him more than books ever had. Books taught him grammar and sums. Life taught him that integrity is the most practical virtue in the world. It taught him that trust is a currency earned in minute deposits, and it is worth more than gold. It taught him that how you do a small thing is how you will do everything. In the dusty, ordinary reality of the shop, amidst the smell of soap and sawdust, Ammon was no longer just learning a language or a trade. He was learning to become a man, one honest sweep, one truthful moment, one small, right step at a time. Part 5. Failure and Never Giving Up. Just as Ammon was finding his rhythm, learning the language of ledgers and the trust of his employer, life delivered one of its oldest and sternest lessons. It is a lesson that comes not as a gentle whisper, but as a sudden, seismic shift that collapses the ground you've carefully learned to stand on. The lesson is this: security is an illusion, and the only true resilience is the ability to begin again. The shop closed. It was not dramatic. There was no fire, no scandal. Mr. Pepper's older brother fell ill in another city, and he had to go to help to take over the family's needs. The little shop was not a chain, it was one man's livelihood. When the man left, the livelihood vanished. One evening, Mr. Pepper placed a hand on Ammon's shoulder, his grip firm and sad. "I have to go, Beta. The shop, it must close." He gave Ammon a small bonus, a final gesture of that hard-earned trust. And then the shutter was pulled down for the last time. The familiar, gritty world of brooms and soap and the bell over the door was gone. Ammon lost his job. The structure he had built, the early mornings, the specific tasks, the quiet pride in doing them well, was dismantled in a day. The ground beneath him, which had just begun to feel solid, turned to sand. The fear returned, not the academic fear of a red pen, but the primal, chilling fear of scarcity. It was a cold knot in his stomach every morning. It was the worried look in his mother's eyes as she served dinner, the unspoken question hovering over the table: what now? The shadow he thought he had outwalked had found him again, longer and darker. But he did not stop. This is the pivotal moment in any life, the moment after the collapse, when the temptation is to lie down in the ruins, to be defined by what has been lost. Ammon sat in his small room that night, the silence oppressive. He looked at his hands. They were the hands that had swept floors, stacked buckets, counted money honestly. They were not the soft hands of a student anymore. They were tools, and tools are meant for use. A quiet, stubborn ember from all his past practice, the English, the planning, the honest work, still glowed within him. It whispered a single, familiar command: take a small step. He searched again. The polished shoes came out once more. The crisp shirt was washed and ironed, but the man wearing them was different. The boyish softness was gone, replaced by a leaner, quieter determination. The rejection stung no less. He applied to warehouses, to larger shops, to offices as a clerk. The no's kept coming. Not enough experience. We need someone older. The position is filled. Each one was a blow. But a strange thing had happened. Where before each rejection felt like a judgment on his soul, now they felt like mismatched keys. They didn't fit, but they didn't mean the lock was broken. The resilience he had built brick by brick was being tested, and it held. He failed again. He got a job as a helper on a delivery truck. It lasted 2 weeks. The driver was impatient, the hours brutal. It was not a good fit. He left. Another failure. A temporary job at a wedding hall, washing endless dishes. His hands grew raw. The work was thankless. It ended when the wedding season did. Another end. Another return to zero. He found another job. Finally, in a large warehouse on the edge of the city, a cavernous space smelling of diesel, dust, and new plastic. His job was to load and unload carts, to check invoices against shipments, to stack boxes in precise, towering rows. The work was hard, physical, and anonymous. He was a number on a time card, but it was stable. It was a new ground to stand on, and here, in this noisy, impersonal place, English was hard again, but in a new way. It was the technical, urgent language of logistics. Manifest, packing slip, forklift, stem, back order. The foreman, a gruff man named Singh, barked orders in a rapid mix of languages. Misunderstanding could mean a misplaced shipment, a shouted reprimand, a costly error. The wall had a new, industrial face, but practice helped. His old friend, the daily return. He carried a tiny notebook. When he heard a new word, he would jot it phonetically. At break, he would ask a more experienced worker, Baya, what does backorder mean? He would listen to the radio in the warehouse office, tuning his ear to the brisk, practical dialect of business. He used the language now as a necessary tool for survival, for understanding his new world. He practiced forming the blunt, clear sentences needed here. The shipment for Zone B is short by 2 boxes. The confidence he'd built was now being applied, stretched, and toughened in a real-world forge. Failure trained him. This was the great revelation. Each closed shop, each lost job, each no had not weakened him, it had trained him. Like a muscle torn and repaired, he was becoming stronger at the broken places. Failure had taught him that an ending is not a full stop, it is a comma. It had taught him to separate his identity from his occupation. He was not Aman the shop assistant. He was Aman who worked honestly. That core self remained even when the job changed. Failure had taught him to scan his environment for the next small step, the next handhold with the calm eyes of a climber, not the panic of a fallen man. He did not quit. Quitting had simply ceased to be a part of his mental vocabulary. It was an option that had rusted shut from disuse. To quit would be to betray all the small steps that had brought him this far, the whispered words, the honest sweeps, the returned money, the daily plans. Persistence was no longer a strategy, it was his nature. He had learned to walk through the valley of failure, not by sprinting through it, but by putting one foot in front of the other, day after day, trusting that the valley, like all things, must eventually end. And as he worked in the dusty warehouse, speaking his hard-won English to clarify an order, he understood the deepest strength is not found in never falling, but in the quiet, dogged, unbeatable determination to rise every single time you do. Part 6. A quiet win, a strong heart. Years passed. They passed not in a blur, but in the steady, granular way that time does, one sunrise, one workday, one quiet evening at a time. The sharp edges of struggle began to soften, not because life became easy, but because Aman grew accustomed to the weight, learned its balance, and found a rhythm within it. Transformation, he realized, is rarely a visible explosion. It is a slow migration of the self, like a river gradually changing its course, grain of soil by grain of soil. Aman improved. But this improvement was not something you could pin to a certificate on a wall or a number in a bank book. It was subtler, woven into the fabric of his being. It was in his walk, no longer the hesitant shuffle of a boy afraid of being seen, but the steady, purposeful tread of a man who knows where he is going, even if the destination is just the next task. It was in his eyes the nervous darting had been replaced by a calm, observing gaze that met the world directly. It was in the set of his shoulders, which now bore responsibility without slumping under it. The improvement was in the quiet authority with which he could solve a problem at the warehouse, explain a procedure to a new worker, or mediate a small dispute. He had become competent, reliable, and deeply, unshakably grounded. Not famous. No one knew his name beyond his family, his neighbors, and the circle of his work. There were no headlines, no awards, no stages to stand upon. His life was not a spectacle, it was a testament. It was a proof of concept lived out in the private, unrecorded hours. The world, in its loud and busy way, rushed past him, chasing grandeur, and he did not chase with it. He had found a different metric for success. Not rich. His home was still modest. The walls were still close. The roof still sang during the monsoon. His meals were still simple, nourishing but never extravagant. He had enough. Enough for his needs, enough to help his parents, enough to save a little for a future that was no longer a source of terror but a landscape of quiet possibility. He had learned that wealth is not just a number, but a state of mind, the freedom from the gnawing anxiety of lack, the richness found in sufficiency and honest labor. but confident. This was his true fortune, the treasure he had mined from the hard rock of his own experience. It was a confidence that had nothing to do with arrogance. It was not loud, it was deep. It was the quiet certainty that he could face most of what life handed him. It was born from 1,000 small victories, understanding a complex shipping manifest, navigating a conversation with a difficult supplier in clear English, fixing a broken latch at home with patient hands. It was the accumulated knowledge that he was a man who could figure things out, who could endure, who could try again tomorrow. This confidence was a warm, steady light inside him, illuminating his path without blinding others. He spoke English without fear. The locked door was not just open, it had been removed from its hinges. He used the language as the practical, connective tool it was meant to be. At work, he wrote clear emails. In the market, he could bargain confidently with a trader from another state. He sometimes read the English newspaper at the tea stall, not to show off, but to understand the wider world. The words were no longer enemies or judges, they were servants, friends, bridges. The fear of mistakes had evaporated because he had made so many and survived them all. He now knew that communication was about being understood, not about being perfect. He began to help others. He saw the new, young worker at the warehouse, struggling with the forms, looking lost and afraid. He saw himself. He would walk over, not with pompous advice, but with simple guidance. This column here is for the quantity. Let me show you. He helped a neighbor's child, struggling with school books, sitting with him on the porch in the evenings, explaining concepts with the same patience Mr. Kapoor had once shown him. In helping, he completed a circle. The strength he had gained was not meant to be hoarded. It was a currency that increased in value only when it was spent on others. He became a small source of stability in his little corner of the world, not a towering lighthouse, but a dependable, glowing lamp. He believed in small steps. This was the unshakable creed of his heart. He knew, in his bones, that they were the only steps that ever lasted. Big leaps could lead to big falls. Dramatic resolutions could crumble under the weight of a single bad day. But the small step, the daily return, the tiny effort repeated was unstoppable. It was the logic of nature, of the ant, of the growing tree, of the flowing river. He had built his life upon this truth, and it had held firm through storms. He had learned the biggest lesson. It was not a secret formula or a mystical insight. It was a trio of plain, powerful principles, forged in the furnace of his own ordinary, extraordinary journey. They were the pillars of his strong heart. Never give up, not because you are sure of victory, but because giving up is the only true defeat. Every other fall is just a pause. Believe in yourself, not because you are the best, but because you are capable of effort. And effort is the father of all achievement. Trust the person you are becoming through your actions. Practice every day, not just a skill, but a way of being. Practice honesty, practice courage, practice showing up. The daily practice is the prayer that shapes your destiny. Take small steps. They are the only way to cross any distance, to climb any mountain, to build any life that lasts. And as for you, my friend, listening to this story of a normal boy, your journey has started. It started the moment you first wished for something more, the moment you felt that quiet, restless wanting for a better, stronger life. You are already on the path. Aman's story is simply a mirror. Look into it and see your own capacity. See that your fears are not unique, your tiredness is not a sign of weakness, and your desire for growth is the seed of everything beautiful. Your small steps are waiting for you. They are in the next honest task you face, in the next difficult conversation you choose to have with kindness, in the next 5 minutes you dedicate to learning something new, or to quieting your own worried mind. You do not need a grand plan. You need only the willingness to begin, today, now. So take a breath. Feel the ground beneath your feet, and take that first small, courageous step. The journey of a strong life is built one small step at a time, and yours, my friend, is already underway. Keep walking. If this story touched you, please like this video. It helps the channel grow. It helps more people hear this story. If you want more stories like this, please subscribe. And if you know someone who feels lost, who feels scared, share this story with them. Maybe it will help, just like it helped Ammon, just like it can help you. Believe in yourself. Practice English every day. Take small steps. Your journey has already started. Thank you for staying till the end.